Russia, Russia, Russia. Russia, Russia, Russia. Russia, Russia, Russia.
It's also basically, and it's also called it. It's kind of Ukraine a little bit.
Fight for Ukraine. New world order.
Ooh.
You know what?
Yeah.
Oh, is there more?
Yeah, well, yeah, but go ahead.
Okay, keep it going.
I was just going to say, it's also Sentient World Simulation, which I got a clip from our 2012 episode, just so people realize that we did actually talk about this in 2012. The Sentient World Simulation, a continuously running, continually updated mirror model of the real world that can be used to predict and evaluate future events and courses of action. There you go.
Wow, you sound so young and vibrant.
I was just
in that
more.
clip.
I was riding waves, man.
We were much
chill,
more
bro.
the California boys that we were back in 2012.
Yeah.
You know, I know you don't have this lined up, so no pressure. But also a bit of a hive mind update as well.
Yeah. Okay. I don't have it lined up.
Yeah. So this is coming from, well, why don't you tell us about it, Guns?
Yeah, this is from CBSNews.com. Headline here: nuclear war between the U.S. and Russia would kill more than 5 billion people just from starvation. Study finds.
Oh, no.
Yeah, good. It's always studies. The toll of nuclear war would be instantly catastrophic for those who are within the immediate path of the weapon. But a new study shows just how deadly the scope of such a war would be. A nuclear blast would cause worldwide famine, according to the study, published in Nature Food on Monday, as massive amounts of soot would block sunlight, disrupt climate systems, and limit food production. Quote,
oh, no.
It would be a global catastrophe for food security, the authors said. And it goes on, and gives all the details that we don't have to necessarily jump into.
I mean, you can assume the whole thing. I mean, they basically gave it to you there. Nukes bad.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. The largest scenario examined a weeks-long war involving 4,400 weapons and 150 TG, or 330.6 billion pounds of soot.
33. Okay, very good.
Yeah, it keeps going on here. It talks about the climate and the fish and the catastrophe and all this kind of stuff. Lead author Lili Jia, a climate scientist at Rutgers University, told Nature that the situation would be, quote, really bad. I think anybody can tell you that. I don't think you need to be a climate scientist to say a nuclear war between two nations. The two of the more powerful nations would be bad. Quote, a large percentage of the people will be starving, they said. The findings are a result of looking at a range of scenarios. The scientists considered whether people would continue to farm animals or use any remaining crops to feed people instead. They also assumed that people would repurpose biofuel crops for human consumption, that food waste would be limited.
Wait, what are biofuel crops? Oh, like growing corn for ethanol or something, probably. Right?
That food waste would be limited and that global food trade would halt as nations tried to save their own. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it goes on, and there's a part at the end here. Alex Wellerstein, historian and professor at the Stevens Institute of Technology, said that it's not in the interests of U.S. enemies to get involved with such actions, but he said it should still be a concern. Quote, future problems are brewing, he said. I guarantee it.
Ooh, guaranteed. Future problems are brewing.
Future problems guaranteed. Again, it doesn't take a climate or whatever, the scientists to tell you that, but okay.
So people who've been listening to the show recently, they know that we've covered a number of stories like this. Yeah. And some may not remember, but in about 2012, there were a number of articles being released from the major outlets, basically centering around how a nuclear blast would, could reverse climate change, reverse, global warming, et cetera, et cetera. And it was kind of crazy. And those same articles started circulating again recently over social media, and just nobody looked at the date on the article. And the date was literally 10 years ago. They were talking about how climate change could be reversed by a small nuclear war. That was kind of the stipulation. We just need a little nuclear war as a treat.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that would save us from climate change. But recently, over the past couple months, especially thanks to the Ukraine crisis, there's been tons of articles, and the interesting part of it coming from different scientific journals. So you've got like the Journal of Climate Change, the Journal of Food.
Yeah, Nature Food is where this came from. Well, it's nature.com, but it's just the food,
Right. The section, right? So it's coming from all angles, different industries, everybody putting their own spin on why a nuclear war would be bad. I find the food one interesting. Because we've been talking about, eating bugs, 3D printed meats,
synthetic meats,
synthetic foods. All our food can be made in a lab. We don't even need to grow agriculture or ranch cattle or anything like that. So it sounds like, if a nuclear winter did destroy crops and stuff, it would be a wonderful opportunity for individuals. Oh, I don't know, like Bill Gates, who has been investing in lab grown meat and stuff like this for many years. It would be he would overnight become some sort of food sultan who would be controlling the entire world's food supply because nobody can grow their own food. I mean, it sounds like a pretty good business model to me.
It sounds like a threat too, because of COVID and the supply chain and all that. There has been sort of a farm food revolution trying to take place anyway, where the Beyond Meat stuff, nobody's eating it, nobody's buying that stuff. And so as a consequence, they need more science to sort of fund that kind of operation. And maybe the big threat is, hey, if you guys don't comply with the fake food stuff, we'll just pull the plug on the nukes, and then you guys will be forced into that kind of food production.
Yeah, right. It's a good, it's almost like the climate change threat isn't as scary as they were hoping. Like not, especially with the inflation and the economy, everybody's way more worried about the price of food, the price of gas, and not worried about climate change. So they're like, oh, well, okay, if climate change isn't getting you there, if the nukes go off, then we'll really be sorry.
Yeah, the nature. Now, go ahead.
This was the article.
Yes.
Regarding the study. Did you take a look at the actual study?
So the actual study, nature.com, the article is titled Global Food Insecurity and Famine from Reduced Crop, Marine Fishery, and Livestock Production Due to Climate Disruption from Nuclear War Soot Injection. And in the article, it mentions the word simulation 23 times.
Right. So they got their little world sentient simulation running.
Yeah, it's pretty obvious when you start looking at it. It's like, oh, these models. It talks about this one climate model. I got into the weeds reading this thing, and there's a Climate 5 crop. There's the CESM simulation, and they're trying to. It's like the most prominent climate model and stuff like that. It's like, who says who decided that? Based on what?
You know what I love? You know what I love about all these? There's, like I said, there's been a number of these studies recently, and they all include like 10,000 nukes. They're like, what would happen if we set off
all the nukes,
5 to 10,000 nukes all at once, a huge nuclear disaster,
nuke train party.
Right. But like the only time that nukes have ever been used have been, 2 in a couple days, which was
allegedly
Nagasaki and Hiroshima, of course. And just those 2, which were extremely small compared to the bombs we have now, extremely small explosions, ended the war immediately, more or less. And boom, it's all over. And on top of that, there are nuclear tests going on around the world all the time.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, it was many times a year, different countries. I mean, just the US alone sets off a bunch of nukes.
Right.
So it's interesting because you can't say, oh, well, if we had one nuclear strike from Russia or a couple even, you can't say that it would completely destroy the ecosystem. Right. It's got to
be a free-for-all. It's got to be a...
Yeah. We're setting off a couple of nukes every year or something like that. So yeah, you cannot fear monger. I just think it matches so well just the world that we live in, the online culture, the outrage, the bringing, threats to their logical conclusions or illogical conclusions, where it's like, we can't quite get too worried about a couple of nukes going on. So let's simulate what would happen if all of them went off at the exact same time. That way we can get people freaked out.
Yeah, and a couple things that derived from this, dailymail.co.uk had the headline, "Want to survive nuclear war? Go to Argentina, South American country's best place to survive." Kind of like the thinking is very Hitlerian, you know. Hitler allegedly went down to Argentina. And they have that portway to Antarctica, which makes me think they're trying to prepare Antarctica as sort of a safe haven during the nuclear Royal Rumble.
That would be I think, that connects it all together. Yeah. Perfect. Yep. We figured it out.
And then you also have the Newsweek article here. That's kind of fun. We don't have to go through the whole thing, but the headline here, Putin ally promotes nuclear strike on NATO to counter military superiority. So, yeah, of course. Okay. Yeah, it's, it's going to be Putin's fault when this thing happens, not the West, not NATO, not the US. It's Putin. Putin's the bad guy.
Yeah.
You guys need to realize, Putin, bad guy.
Yeah, we know this.